They had forgotten what fear felt like. Not metaphorically. Not culturally. Biologically. It had been removed. Centuries ago, when their empire was still young and expanding, their scientists had identified fear as a flaw, an inefficiency in decision-making. It caused hesitation. It introduced doubt. It slowed reaction time. So they erased it. Gene by gene. Instinct by instinct. Until nothing remained. What replaced it wasn't courage. It wasn't bravery. Those required fear to exist in the first place. What they became was something else entirely. Cold. Certain. Unstoppable. They didn't retreat. Not because they chose not to, but because the concept itself no longer existed within them. Across thousands of worlds, their reputation solidified into legend. They were the species that never hesitated, never panicked, never failed due to emotion. Entire civilizations surrendered at the mere confirmation of their approach. Not because they were the strongest, but because they were inevitable. A force that did not stop, did not doubt, did not fear, until they reached the edge of a system that wasn't supposed to matter. It wasn't marked as significant. No major resources. No advanced civilizations. Just another point on the map. Another step in expansion. Routine assimilation. Their command node designated it. Standard procedure. Enter system. Establish dominance. Neutralize resistance. Move on. It had been done thousands of times before. It would be done thousands more. Their fleet entered without formation adjustments. No heightened alert. No deviation from protocol. Because nothing in their history had ever required it. The system was quiet. Too quiet. Not empty. But still. No defensive grid. No patrol signatures. No visible attempt at resistance. That was unusual. But not concerning. Primitive species often failed to detect incoming fleets until it was too late. Others attempted to hide. Neither outcome mattered. Their sensors swept the system. One inhabited world confirmed. Technological level. Moderate. Below threshold for meaningful resistance. Proceed. The command node transmitted. The fleet advanced. Perfectly synchronized. Perfectly controlled. And then, something shifted. It wasn't external. Not at first. No enemy ships appeared. No weapons fired. No signal warned of danger. But something felt wrong. The first to notice it didn't understand what they were experiencing. Because there was no reference point. No memory of anything similar. A hesitation. A microscopic delay in response time. So small it barely registered. But it was there. Report anomaly. 1 unit transmitted. No anomaly detected. Systems normal. The fleet continued forward. And the feeling grew. Not stronger. Clearer. Like something was pressing against their awareness. Something undefined. Their sensors adjusted. Scanning deeper. Looking for the source. Nothing. No ships. No structures. No visible threat. Just space. And yet, the discomfort remained. Another unit reported it. Then another. A pattern forming. Not in data. In perception. Their command node processed the reports. Cross-referenced inputs. Analyzed neural feedback. And found something impossible. Deviation. A fluctuation in cognitive response. Not caused by external stimuli. Not triggered by threat detection. Just present. That wasn't possible. Their species didn't deviate. Didn't react without cause. Didn't experience anything beyond calculated response. And yet, they were. What is this? 1 unit transmitted. No answer came. Because there was no classification for it. No category. No definition. The fleet slowed. Not by command. By reaction. Unintentional. A fractional reduction in forward velocity. The first time, in recorded history, they had ever done so. Without instruction. Without reason. Without understanding why. The inhabited world remained ahead. Silent. Waiting. Still showing no signs of defense. No fleet. No shields. Nothing. And yet, the closer they moved, the stronger that undefined sensation became. Not overwhelming, but persistent. Intrusive. Like something watching them. Without being seen. Their sensors pushed further. Scanning frequencies they rarely used. Looking for hidden signatures. Distortions. Anomalies. Anything. Then, they found it. Not a fleet. Not a weapon. A single object. Stationary. Positioned between them and the planet. Massive. Unmoving. At first glance, it didn't register as a threat. No active weapon systems. No aggressive posture. No energy signatures indicating imminent attack. It just existed. Heavy. Still. Almost passive. Identify, the command node ordered. The data returned quickly. Origin, human. The designation meant little. A minor species. Previously observed. No record of significant resistance. No history of victory against major powers. No reason to hesitate. And yet, the sensation intensified. Now unmistakable. Not confusion. Not uncertainty. Something deeper. Something older. Something they had removed long ago. Their systems flagged it again. Cognitive deviation increasing. Neural patterns shifting. Unstable. The command node attempted to suppress it. To correct the anomaly. But it didn't respond. Because it wasn't an error. It was something else. Something returning. The human ship remained still. No movement. No communication. No visible acknowledgement of their presence. And yet, every unit in the fleet felt it. That pressure. That awareness. That impossible sensation building at the edges of their perception. Then, one unit transmitted something that had never been recorded in their entire history. A single word. Unrecognized. Unprocessed. But understood instinctively by every mind connected to the network. Fee. The command node froze. Not physically, but in thought. Because that word, that concept, should not exist. It had been erased. Removed. Forgotten. And yet, here it was. Returning. Not as memory. As experience. The fleet stopped. Completely. Not by command. Not by decision. Because for the first time, something had made them hesitate. And they didn't understand why. They had never needed to prove themselves. That was the difference. Other empires rose through struggle. Through war. Through resistance that shaped them into something stronger. But not this one. They didn't rise. They advanced. System by system. World by world. Not through desperation. But through certainty. Every expansion followed the same pattern. Arrival. Assessment. Assimilation. There were no drawn-out wars. No prolonged conflicts. Because there was no point. By the time their fleets entered a system, the outcome was already decided. They didn't bluff. Didn't posture. They didn't need to. Their reputation arrived before they did. Thousands of worlds had already fallen. Civilizations far more advanced than most had attempted resistance once. Only once. Because that was all it took. The Empire didn't just defeat enemies. It erased the idea that fighting back was possible. Their methods were efficient. Cold. Precise. If a species resisted, it was eliminated quickly. Not out of cruelty. Out of necessity. Resistance wasted time. And time was the only resource they optimized above all else. So others learned. When their fleets appeared, surrender wasn't a choice. It was the only rational outcome. Entire star systems would go silent before they even arrived. Defenses powered down. Weapons disabled. Populations awaiting instruction. Not out of fear. Because fear implied emotion. Out of logic. Because survival required it. That was the true power of the Empire. Not just their ships. Not just their technology. But their certainty. They never doubted. Never questioned. Never hesitated. And that made them unstoppable. Because hesitation was the one weakness every other species shared. The moment before action. The pause before decision. The fragment of uncertainty that slowed reaction. They had removed that. Completely. Which meant they always acted first. Always acted correctly. Always acted without delay. Against something like that, no one could keep up. So the galaxy adapted. Not by fighting them, but by avoiding them. Borders shifted. Routes changed. Entire regions of space were abandoned rather than risk their attention. And still, the Empire expanded. Unchallenged. Unstoppable. Until now. Because as their fleet hovered at the edge of the human system, that same certainty remained. Untouched. The anomaly they were experiencing, that strange, undefined sensation, had not yet been recognized for what it was. It hadn't changed their conclusion. Humanity was still categorized the same way. Technologically inferior. Strategically insignificant. A minor civilization. Another world to be processed. Another step forward. The command node recalculated its approach. Standard procedure remained valid. No need for overwhelming force. No need for full fleet deployment. A controlled entry would suffice. Minimal resistance expected. Proceed with assimilation protocol. The order transmitted across the fleet. Immediate. Absolute. And every unit responded in perfect synchronization. The hesitation from before, that fractional delay, was suppressed. Contained. Irrelevant. Because logic still dictated the outcome. Nothing in their history suggested otherwise. They had faced stronger species. Faster ones. More advanced. More numerous. All of them had fallen. All of them had reached the same conclusion in the end. Resistance was pointless. And humanity, from every available metric, was no exception. Ahead of them, the human world remained silent. No fleet mobilization. No defensive formations. No attempt to communicate. Just stillness. A primitive response. A predictable one. The lone human vessel between them and the planet remained stationary. Unmoving. Massive. But unimpressive. Its structure lacked refinement. Its systems lacked efficiency. Its presence lacked purpose. It didn't maneuver. Didn't engage. Didn't even acknowledge the approaching fleet. To the Empire, it was nothing. A relic. An obstacle that would be removed without effort. Neutralize obstruction. The command node transmitted. A simple directive. Routine. Expected. Weapons systems began to align. Not hurried. Not aggressive. Just precise. Because that was how they operated. No wasted energy. No unnecessary force. Just enough to achieve the objective. As it had always been. As it would always be. Because for them, the outcome was never in question. Only the execution. And as their weapons locked onto the silent human ship, the same conclusion echoed across their entire network. This would be no different. Another system. Another victory. Another step forward. Because they were the species that feared nothing. And nothing had ever proven them wrong. They expected noise. That was always the first sign. Panic. Chaotic transmissions flooding every frequency. Distress signals. Military chatter. Civilian broadcasts overlapping in desperate confusion. It didn't matter the species. Didn't matter the level of advancement. The pattern was always the same. When their fleets arrived, order collapsed. Fear, though they no longer felt it themselves, was something they recognized in others with perfect accuracy. It had a signature, a rhythm, a breakdown, and it always came before surrender. So as they crossed into orbit, as their ships aligned above the human world, they waited for it. Sensors open, channels monitored, ready to receive the inevitable. But nothing came. No distress calls. No frantic mobilization. No sudden activation of defensive systems. The planet below remained calm. Not inactive. Alive. Structured. Communications flowed across its surface in organized patterns. Infrastructure remained stable. Population centers showed no signs of mass evacuation or collapse. It was as if they hadn't arrived at all. The command node processed the data, cross-referenced historical encounters. No match. This response, or lack of one, didn't fit any known behavioral model. Scan for deception, it ordered. Deep scans initiated. Surface readings. Subsurface analysis. Orbital sweeps. No hidden fleets. No concealed weapon arrays. No signs of an ambush. Just a world, continuing as if nothing had changed. Then, a transmission. Clear. Direct. Not scrambled. Not delayed. Sent openly across all frequencies. Unidentified fleet. You are within controlled space. The voice was steady. Not raised. Not strained. No urgency. No fear. We acknowledge your presence. A pause. Not hesitation. Deliberate spacing. We request that you observe before you act. Silence followed. Not interference. Completion. That was the entire message. No demands. No threats. No surrender. Just a request. The fleet did not respond immediately, because the command node required time to process. Not due to complexity, but due to inconsistency. This wasn't how first contact worked. Not with them. No species had ever asked them to wait, to observe, to hesitate. The concept itself was irrelevant to their operational structure. And yet, the request remained. Simple, unforced, unafraid. Clarify intent. One unit transmitted internally. No answer came, because intent implied uncertainty, and the humans had shown none. They hadn't begged, hadn't attempted to negotiate, hadn't even tried to explain themselves. They had simply asked. Another scan confirmed the same results. No hidden threat. No defensive escalation. No indication that the planet below was preparing for conflict. Only stability, consistency, control. That same undefined sensation from before returned. Stronger now. Not overwhelming, but persistent. Like a pressure building beneath awareness. Their systems flagged it again. Cognitive deviation increasing. Still unclassified. Still unresolved. The command node evaluated possible responses. Immediate attack. Standard protocol. Eliminate potential resistance before it forms. But something, subtle, unquantifiable, interfered with the decision. Not enough to stop it, but enough to delay it. For the first time in countless expansions, they didn't act immediately. They considered. Not emotionally, not instinctively, but differently. Observation window, minimal, the command node transmitted. A compromise. A deviation from protocol. Small enough to justify. Large enough to matter. The fleet held position. Weapons remained ready. Button fired. Sensors intensified. Focused on the world below. On its systems. On its structure. On its people. They expected to find something hidden. Some indication that this calm was artificial. That beneath the surface, there was fear, waiting to break. But the deeper they scanned, the more consistent the data became. The planet wasn't pretending. It wasn't suppressing panic. It simply wasn't panicking. And that was wrong. Because every species panicked. Every civilization reacted. Every mind, when faced with something greater than itself, broke. That was the pattern. The rule. The certainty. And yet, humanity didn't. The command node registered the anomaly, marked it, but could not resolve it. Because there was nothing to compare it to. No prior data. No historical reference. Only this moment. This system. This species. That had asked them to observe. And against all logic, they had agreed. The fleet remained still. Watching. Waiting. For something. Anything. That would restore the certainty they had always relied on. But as the seconds passed, and the human world continued unchanged beneath them, that certainty began to shift. Not breaking. Not yet. But cracking. In a way they had never experienced before. Because for the first time, they weren't the ones controlling what happened next. At first, they assumed it was inefficiency. That was the simplest explanation. Primitive species often displayed irregular behavior, emotional instability, inconsistent decision-making, reactions that didn't align with survival optimization. Humans, at a glance, appeared no different. Their networks were chaotic. Information flowed in overlapping layers, civilian, military, private, public, all interacting at once without centralized control. No single command structure. No unified directive. Just noise. The Empire had seen this before. Disorganized species. Easy to predict. Easy to break. Because once pressure was applied, they collapsed into panic. And then, into submission. But as observation continued, that expectation failed to materialize. The noise didn't collapse. It stabilized. Not into order, but into something else. A pattern. Loose. Fluid. But consistent in ways that didn't align with any known system. Isolate behavioral clusters, the command node instructed. Data streams separated. Military responses. Civilian activity. Government communication. Individually, each made sense. Strategic units repositioning defensively. Civilians adjusting routines. Leadership coordinating responses. All within acceptable parameters. But when analyzed together, they contradicted each other. Military units prepared for conflict, while civilian broadcasts continued as normal. Emergency protocols activated in some regions, while others showed no change at all. Leaders issued calm directives, while independent groups openly discussed worst-case scenarios. It wasn't unified. It wasn't efficient. And yet, it worked. No panic. No collapse. No singular point of failure. Because there was no singular structure to break. The command node attempted to model it. Simulations ran. Projected outcomes calculated. Each one failed. Because the system they were observing didn't follow a consistent logic. It shifted, adjusted, contradicted itself, and still functioned. That wasn't supposed to be possible. Increased depth of analysis. They looked closer. Individual humans. Isolated behaviors. Perhaps the inconsistency existed only at scale. But what they found was worse. A group of humans in one region initiated evacuation protocols. Logical. Survival-focused. Predictable. In another region, humans gathered. Not to flee, but to watch the sky. To observe the fleet above them. No defensive measures. No attempt to hide. Just observation. That made no sense. Another cluster. Military personnel preparing for engagement. Outnumbered. Outmatched. No viable path to victory. And yet, they prepared anyway. Not as a delaying tactic. Not as a calculated sacrifice. But as if the act itself mattered. That defied optimization. Even more disturbing was what came next. A signal intercepted from within their networks. A rescue operation. A small group of humans attempting to retrieve individuals from a high-risk zone. The probability of success. Minimal. The cost. High. The logical action. Abandonment. Preserve resources. Ensure survival of the majority. That was the correct decision. That was always the correct decision. But they didn't choose it. They went in anyway. Risked everything. For a handful of lives. And succeeded. Barely. Inefficient. Illogical. And yet, effective. Because those rescued individuals returned to function. Returned to contribute. Returned to the system. Strengthening it. In ways that weren't immediately measurable. The command node paused. That wasn't supposed to happen. Sacrifice should weaken a system. Reduce its capability. Not reinforce it. Another example surfaced. A human unit engaged in defensive positioning. Outmatched. Retreat was possible. Survival probability increased significantly if they withdrew. Instead, they held position. Not to win. Not even to survive, but to buy time. For others. Time for evacuation. Time for preparation. Time for something they wouldn't live to see. That wasn't logic. That was something else. Something the Empire had removed from itself long ago. And now, they couldn't process it, couldn't quantify it, couldn't predict it, because it didn't follow any known rule. The more they observed, the worse it became. Humans contradicted themselves constantly. They feared, and acted anyway. They calculated risk, and ignored it. They chose survival, until they didn't. And yet, despite all of that, their system held. Not perfectly, but persistently. Like something designed not to be optimal, but to endure. The command node attempted one final analysis. Define human behavior model. The system processed, compared data, searched for patterns, and returned nothing. No consistent framework, no predictive structure, no logic that applied across all scenarios. Just variability, endless, unstable, impossible to reduce. One unit finally transmitted what others had been processing but unable to express. They don't make sense. It wasn't an error. It was a conclusion. And for the first time, that conclusion wasn't enough. Because the Empire didn't need to understand its enemies before. It only needed to outmatch them. But this required understanding. And understanding required logic, rules, consistency, something to follow. Humans offered none of it. And that was the most disturbing part. Because something that didn't follow logic, couldn't be predicted, couldn't be controlled, couldn't be guaranteed to fail. Across the fleet, that same undefined sensation returned again. Stronger now, clearer, no longer just a deviation, no longer just an anomaly, something deeper, something older, something they had erased, and were now experiencing again. Without understanding how or why, they had removed fear to become unstoppable. But now, facing something that didn't follow any rule they knew, they encountered something far worse than fear itself. Uncertainty. And unlike fear, they had no defense against it. The first engagement wasn't supposed to matter. It wasn't even classified as a battle. Just a correction. A minor adjustment in the system. A human colony had moved outside acceptable parameters. Too close to a resource vector. Too unpredictable to ignore. Standard procedure dictated a response. Limited force. Minimal deployment. Enough to remove the anomaly. Without diverting primary fleet resources. A small strike group detached. Efficient. Precise. Overwhelming by any reasonable metric. Against any known species. It would have been more than enough. The colony was located on the edge of the system. A scattered network of structures across a barren surface. No planetary shield. No orbital defense grid. No visible fleet. Insignificant. Engagement expected duration. Minimal. The command node calculated. The strike group advanced without hesitation. Weapons systems aligned. Targeting solutions established. No need for adaptation. No need for complexity. Just execution. The first shots were fired. Clean. Accurate. Entire sections of the colony vanished in controlled bursts of energy. Structures collapsed. Power signatures dropped. Exactly as expected. But the response was not. Instead of silence, there was movement. Not organized. Not coordinated in any recognizable pattern. Scattered. Individual units activating independently. Vehicles emerging from hidden positions. Small craft launching without formation. No central command signal. No unified strategy. Just reaction. At first glance, it looked like panic. Unstructured resistance. Inefficient. Predictable. The strike group adjusted accordingly. Target the active units. Eliminate resistance. Proceed to completion. But something went wrong. The first human counterattack didn't aim for the strongest ship. Didn't focus on command structures. Didn't follow any priority logic at all. Instead, It targeted a seemingly irrelevant support vessel. A logistical node. Not critical. But when it was hit, something unexpected happened. A chain reaction. Not within the fleet, but within their coordination. The removal of that single node caused a temporary disruption in data flow. Minimal, but measurable. A delay. A fraction of a second. And in that fraction, 3 more strikes hit. Precise. Not random. Timed. The strike group corrected instantly, rerouting data, restoring synchronization. But the damage had already occurred. Not physical. Not yet. Structural. Their perfect timing. Interrupted. Their flawless coordination. Momentarily broken. That wasn't supposed to happen. Reinforce communication integrity, the command node ordered. Adaptation began. Faster data redundancy. Stronger link stabilization. Fix the weakness. Remove the vulnerability, as they had done countless times before. But the humans didn't stop. They changed. Immediately. No delay. No transition period. One moment they were scattered. The next, they were somewhere else. A cluster of small craft feigned retreat. Moving erratically. Drawing pursuit. The strike group followed. Calculated interception paths. Predictable outcomes. Except, it wasn't a retreat. It was a lure. The pursuing units crossed an invisible threshold, and the ground beneath them detonated. Hidden charges. Buried deep. Timed perfectly. Not to destroy, but to destabilize. Shockwaves disrupted targeting systems. Forced recalibration. Another delay. Another fraction of a second. And again, the humans struck. From a different direction. Not where they had been. Not where they should have been. Just there. Improvised weapons. Unconventional angles. No pattern. No predictability. The strike group adapted again. Faster this time. Compensating for irregular tactics. Expanding engagement parameters. But the more they adapted, the worse it became. Because every adjustment they made was based on patterns. And humans weren't following any. They attacked when they shouldn't. Retreated when they had advantage. Sacrificed units. Not to win, but to create opportunities. Every loss became a setup. Every retreat, a repositioning. Every apparent mistake, a trap. One human craft deliberately flew into direct fire. Destroyed instantly. Pointless. Except, it wasn't. Because the moment it was targeted, the strike group adjusted its firing pattern. Reallocating energy. Shifting defensive coverage. And in that shift, a gap opened. Small. Brief. Enough. A second wave of attacks hit through that gap. Critical systems. Precision strikes. Not enough to destroy, but enough to disrupt. Again. And again. And again. The strike group began to slow. Not physically. Operationally. Each adaptation required processing. Each adjustment required recalculation. And the humans kept changing faster than they could compensate. How are they predicting us? One unit transmitted. But they weren't. That was the problem. They weren't predicting. They were reacting. Improvising. Making decisions that didn't follow optimal paths, but created unpredictable outcomes. The command node attempted to stabilize the engagement. Force decisive strike. End it. Overwhelm the chaos with absolute power. Weapons charged. Full-scale elimination protocol initiated. For a moment, control returned. The strike group aligned. Energy built. A final, decisive blow. Ready to erase everything below. Then, nothing. The targeting systems failed. Not destroyed. Confused. Because every human unit had moved. Not away. Not into formation. Into chaos. Too many variables. Too many independent movements. No clear target priority. No optimal solution. For the first time, the strike group couldn't determine the correct action. That hesitation. That impossibility of choosing created something they had never experienced before. A delay without resolution. And in that delay, the humans struck again. Harder, closer, more precise. The strike group took its first real damage. Not catastrophic, but undeniable. Systems failing. Coordination weakening. Efficiency dropping. The engagement had lasted far longer than projected. Far longer than acceptable. And the outcome was no longer certain. The command node paused. Not out of fear, but because the data no longer aligned with expectation. This wasn't supposed to happen. This wasn't how battles worked. This wasn't how weaker species fought. And yet, the humans weren't trying to win. They were trying to disrupt, to confuse, to destabilize something that had never been unstable before. And it was working. As the strike group pulled back, just slightly, just enough to reassess, the realization settled across every connected unit. This wasn't a primitive species. This wasn't a predictable enemy. This was something else. Something that didn't fight to follow rules. Something that fought to break them. And for the first time, the invincible empire had encountered resistance it couldn't understand. And worse, couldn't control. It didn't happen all at once. There was no moment where everything changed. No signal that marked the transition. Just small breaks. Tiny fractures in something that had never fractured before. The strike group should have recovered. That was the expectation. Every disruption they had ever encountered, they had adapted to. Every anomaly, they had corrected. Every resistance, they had overcome. But this didn't stabilize. The more they adjusted, the more unstable it became. Human units continued to move in ways that made no sense. Not just unpredictable, counterproductive. At least, that's what the models said. A cluster of human forces abandoned a defensible position. High ground. Clear advantage. They left it. Walked away from it. The strike group advanced immediately. Logical. Take the position. Secure the advantage. But the moment they did, the ground beneath it collapsed. Not from hidden explosives. From structural overload. The humans had destabilized it before leaving. Turned strength into weakness. And the strike group, by following logic, walked directly into it. Damage wasn't severe. But that wasn't the point. The point was this. The correct decision had been wrong. That wasn't supposed to happen. Another engagement followed. A human unit split in two. One half engaged directly. The other retreated. Standard analysis. Pursue the retreating unit. Eliminate survivors. Prevent regrouping. So they did. And the moment they committed, the attacking half changed behavior. Not retreating. Not holding. Advancing. Aggressively. Not to win, but to force a reaction. To divide attention. To create a gap. And in that gap, hidden weapons activated. Not powerful. Not efficient. But perfectly timed. Another disruption. Another delay. Another failure of prediction. The command node began reallocating processing power. More analysis. Faster calculations. More adaptive layers. But it didn't help. Because humans weren't following a pattern. They were changing mid-action. Not between battles. During them. Learning in real time. Adjusting before outcomes resolved. Reacting not just to what was happening, but to what might happen next. That wasn't adaptation. That was something else. Something faster. Something unstable. And it was spreading. Across the strike group, more units began to report anomalies. Not in systems. In decision flow. Tiny delays. Micro-hesitations. Not commanded. Not calculated. Just there. The command node attempted correction. Maintain operational consistency. Orders reinforced. Processes tightened. But something had changed. Because now, before each action, there was a moment. A fraction of time that hadn't existed before. A pause. Not enough to disrupt function. But enough to be noticed. One unit delayed firing. Just long enough for a human craft to escape. Another recalculated targeting, even though the original solution was optimal. A third adjusted trajectory, without cause. These were errors, but not random ones. They all came from the same source, something the Empire no longer understood, because it had been erased long ago. Fear, not fully formed, not recognized, but present, growing, because for the first time, they were facing something that didn't behave correctly, didn't respond predictably, didn't collapse under pressure, and worse, didn't seem to care about survival the way other species did. A human vessel, heavily damaged, altered course. Not away from the fight, but deeper into it, directly toward a cluster of Empire ships. No weapons left. No chance of victory. No logical reason to continue. And yet, it accelerated. Impact was inevitable. The strike group calculated the outcome instantly. Minimal damage. Insignificant loss. So they didn't avoid it. Didn't need to. But just before impact, the human ship transmitted something. A burst signal. Unencrypted. Meaningless at first glance. But it triggered something. Hidden units. Dormant systems. A trap that had been waiting for that exact moment. The explosion wasn't from the ship. It was from everything around it. The human vessel had never been the weapon. It had been the trigger. And it had chosen to die. Just to activate it. The strike group absorbed the damage. Again, not catastrophic, but cumulative, building, unpredictable, and impossible to model. The command node paused again. Longer this time. Not out of failure, but because the calculations no longer converged. Every scenario led to instability. Every prediction broke down. Because the humans kept doing something impossible. They kept choosing outcomes that didn't prioritize their own survival. And that made them dangerous. Not because they were stronger. Not because they were faster. But because they were willing to lose. In ways that guaranteed the enemy lost more. That wasn't efficiency. That wasn't logic. That was something else entirely. And the Empire, for the first time, couldn't account for it. Across the battlefield, the hesitation spread. Not enough to stop them. Not enough to break them. But enough to change something fundamental. Before every decision, there was now a question. Small, unfamiliar, unwanted, but impossible to remove. What if this is wrong? That question had never existed before. And now, it was everywhere. In every calculation. In every action. In every moment where certainty used to be absolute. The Empire still fought. Still advanced. Still held overwhelming power. But something had changed. Something subtle. Something growing. Something they didn't understand. Because they had removed the ability to understand it. And as another human maneuver defied every prediction. Forcing yet another costly adjustment. That feeling took clearer shape. Not just hesitation. Not just uncertainty. Something deeper. Something older. Something they had once known. And chosen to erase. Now returning. Piece by piece. Forming again within minds that had been designed to never feel it. And for the first time, the invincible Empire began to experience something it had not felt in centuries. Not fully. Not completely. But undeniably. Fear. They didn't understand it. So they tried to dissect it. That was how they solved everything. If something resisted classification, they broke it down. Reduced it to data. Analyzed it until it made sense. So when the first human vessel was captured, damaged, disabled but not destroyed, the command node diverted immediate resources. Not to destroy. To study. Because whatever this species was doing, it wasn't random. It only looked that way. Inside the wreckage, they found no central control system. No unified processing core. No single intelligence directing everything. Instead, they found fragments. Independent modules. Human operators. Each one functioning separately. Connected, but not dependent. That alone was inefficient. Redundant. Unnecessary. But then they accessed the data. Historical records. biological archives, behavioral studies, and what they found didn't align with any known evolutionary path. Most species progressed toward stability, toward optimization, toward removing internal conflict. Humans had done the opposite. Their history wasn't a path toward unity. It was a constant state of struggle. Against their environment, against scarcity, against predators, against each other. Every stage of their development was marked by conflict. Not occasional, continuous. Wars, internal divisions, competing ideologies, endless cycles of creation and destruction. By every known metric, they should have collapsed, extinguished themselves long before reaching space. And yet, they didn't. They adapted, not by eliminating conflict, but by surviving it, over and over again. The command node processed deeper. Biological responses, neural structures, chemical triggers. And there, it found the answer. Fear. Not removed, not suppressed. Integrated. A constant presence in their system. Active. Influential. Every decision, every reaction, every moment of uncertainty, tied to it. That made no sense. Fear reduced efficiency. It caused hesitation. Introduced error. The Empire had removed it for that exact reason. And yet, humans had kept it. Worse, they had built around it. Used it. The data showed something even more disturbing. Humans didn't just experience fear. They expected it. Prepared for it. Trained within it. Military units subjected themselves to controlled stress. Simulated failure. Simulated loss. Simulated death. Over and over. Until the response changed. Until fear no longer stopped them, but drove them. They didn't eliminate hesitation. They acted through it. Used it to sharpen reaction. To heighten awareness. To push beyond limits. That was inefficient. But it worked. Because fear did something the Empire had lost. It forced consideration. Forced adaptation. Forced change. Not just in response to known threats, but to unknown ones. And that was the difference. The Empire adapted after. Humans adapted during. Mid-action. Mid-conflict. Mid-failure. The data logs from the battlefield confirmed it. Human units experiencing extreme stress did not shut down. They escalated, pushed harder, took greater risks, made decisions outside predictive models, and turned them into advantages. Because fear didn't paralyze them. It expanded their options. Forced them to consider things that logic alone would discard. Unlikely moves. Irrational choices. High-risk actions. And in doing so, they broke predictability. The command node reached a conclusion. Cold. Precise. Terrifying. Fear is not a weakness. A pause. Fear is a multiplier. That statement propagated across the network. Every unit received it, processed it, and failed to integrate it, because they had no framework for it, no internal structure to replicate it. They had removed fear completely, and with it, they had removed something else. The ability to operate under true uncertainty, to act when outcomes weren't clear, to make decisions without perfect data. Humans did that constantly, because they had no choice. Their entire existence had been built on it. They had survived not by being optimal, but by being adaptable under pressure. And pressure was something they didn't avoid. They embraced it. The captured logs showed human communications during battle. Not calm, not controlled. Voices strained. Heart rates elevated. Adrenal responses spiking. They were afraid. Openly. Undeniably. And still. They fought. Still. They advanced. Still. They chose actions that logic alone would never allow. That was the truth. Not hidden in their weapons. Not in their ships. Not in their technology. But in themselves. Humans were not fearless. They were something far more dangerous. They were afraid. And acted anyway. The command node processed this for the first time. Not as data, but as implication. If fear increased unpredictability, if unpredictability broke adaptation, if adaptation failed, then the Empire, for all its perfection, had a critical weakness, one it had created itself, and the humans, without ever intending to, had become the perfect counter to it. Across the fleet, that same growing sensation sharpened again. Stronger, clearer, no longer undefined, no longer distant. Because now, they understood what it was. And understanding it didn't remove it. It made it worse. Because they had no way to control it. No way to remove it again. No way to stop what was happening inside their own minds. For the first time, their enemy wasn't just outside. It was within. And it was something humans had lived with, adapted to, and mastered, for their entire existence. It didn't break in a single moment. There was no collapse, no sudden reversal where the invincible became weak. Instead, it shifted, subtly, quietly, irreversibly. At first, the Empire still advanced, still deployed fleets, still executed operations, still followed doctrine. Because that was what they were built to do, what they had always done. But something had changed beneath the surface. Not in their weapons, not in their numbers, in their certainty. Because now, before every action, there was that question. Small, unwanted, persistent. What if this is wrong? At first, they ignored it, suppressed it, reinforced their calculations. But the question didn't go away. It grew, because the humans kept feeding it. Not directly, not intentionally, but inevitably. The next engagement began like all the others. Empire fleet enters system. Human presence detected. Standard engagement protocols initiated. But this time, the humans didn't wait. They were already there. Hidden. Not cloaked. Not invisible. Just positioned. In places that didn't make sense. Asteroid shadows. Debris fields. Orbital blind spots that shouldn't have mattered. Except now. They did. Because the moment the Empire fleet crossed into range, the attack began. Not overwhelming. Not decisive. Precise. Targeted strikes on outer units. Quick. Disruptive. Then, silence. The humans vanished. Not retreating. Not fleeing. Just gone. The Empire recalculated. Tracked trajectories. Predicted positions. Advanced. And found nothing. Empty space. But the damage was done. Minor. But deliberate. A message. You are not in control. Another system. Another engagement. This time, no attack. Just signals. Human transmissions. Intercepted. Unencrypted. Easy to read. Too easy. Coordinates. Fleet movements. Strategic plans. The Empire processed them instantly. Adjusted accordingly. Moved to intercept. Perfect positioning. Perfect timing. And when they arrived, there was nothing there. No fleet. No targets. Only emptiness. And then, the attack came. From behind. From angles that shouldn't have been possible. From positions that hadn't existed seconds before. Because the humans hadn't given them information. They had given them a decision. A choice. And the Empire, by acting logically, had chosen exactly what the humans wanted. That was new. Dangerously new. Because now, the humans weren't just reacting. They were anticipating. Shaping behavior. Guiding outcomes. Not through force, but through understanding. They understood fear. Not just how it felt, but how it influenced decisions. How it created hesitation. How it altered logic. And they used it. Subtly. Relentlessly. A fleet preparing for engagement detected movement. Small. Insignificant. A lone human craft drifting at the edge of sensor range. No threat. No weapons active. Just there. Watching. The fleet adjusted formation. Slightly. Just in case. And in that slight adjustment, their defensive alignment shifted. Not enough to matter. Except, It did. Because the real attack came seconds later. Through the gap they had just created. Not by mistake. Not by chance. By design. The lone craft had never been a threat. It had been a question. And the Empire, without realizing it, had answered. Again. And again. And again. Across multiple systems, the pattern repeated. Humans applying pressure. Not constant. Not overwhelming. Just enough. Always enough. To force decisions. To create doubt. To make the Empire think. Instead of act. And that was the turning point. Because the Empire had never been built to think under uncertainty. It had been built to execute certainty. Perfectly. Relentlessly. Without hesitation. Now, hesitation was everywhere. Micro-delays in firing. Formation adjustments that shouldn't have been necessary. Recalculations that slowed response time. Not failures, but cracks. Spreading. Widening. And the humans kept pushing. Not to destroy. Not yet. But to weaken. To erode the one thing that made the Empire unstoppable. Their confidence. Because once that was gone, everything else would follow. A final engagement made it clear. A major fleet, one of their strongest, entered contested space. Fully prepared. Fully reinforced. Ready for anything. And yet, the humans didn't attack immediately. They waited. Let the fleet settle. Let them prepare. Let them think they understood the battlefield. And then, they changed it. Multiple signals. False targets. Conflicting data. Simulated threats. Real ones hidden among them. The fleet responded. Adjusted. Recalculated. Again and again. Until something happened that had never happened before. They slowed. Not physically. Mentally. Decision-making fractured. Too many variables. Too many possibilities. Too much uncertainty. And in that moment, the humans struck. Not everywhere. Just where it mattered. Command structures. Coordination nodes. Points of control. The fleet didn't collapse. But it faltered. Lost cohesion. Lost precision. And that was enough. Because now, they weren't the hunters anymore. They were reacting. Responding. Trying to keep up. And the humans had taken control. Across the war, the realization spread. Slowly. Then all at once. The Empire wasn't advancing anymore. It was being led. Guided. Pressed into positions it didn't choose. Forced into decisions it didn't fully understand. And for the first time, it was being hunted. Not by a stronger force. Not by a faster one. But by a species that understood something it had erased. Something it could no longer control. Fear. Not as weakness. But as a weapon. And against that, the Empire had no defense. It happened in a place the Empire believed was already secured. A dead system. Stripped of resources. No strategic value. No reason to return. And that was exactly why the humans chose it. The fleet assigned there was massive. Not because it needed to be, but because the Empire had begun compensating. More ships. More redundancy. More control. An attempt to restore what had been lost. Certainty. They called it a stabilization force. A guarantee that nothing unexpected could happen again. Thousands of vessels. Perfectly synchronized. Perfectly ready. And completely unaware. The first sign was subtle. A faint signal. Human. Unencrypted. Broadcast across open space. Come and finish this. The command node analyzed it instantly. Trap probability. High. Threat level. Contained. Outcome. Manageable. Because this time, they were ready. No hesitation. No fragmentation. The fleet advanced as one. Scanning everything. Every particle. Every fluctuation. No hidden fleets. No cloaked weapons. Nothing. Just empty space. And a single human formation. Small. Insignificant. Outnumbered beyond any measurable scale. They didn't maneuver. Didn't scatter. Didn't attempt to hide. They waited. That alone. was wrong. Every previous engagement, humans moved, shifted, adapted. But not this time. This time, they held position, as if they wanted to be seen. The command node processed it. Calculated engagement. Overwhelming force applied. No complexity required. Erase. The order moved instantly through the fleet. Weapons aligned. Energy surged. And then, the humans moved. Not away. Forward. Directly into the advancing fleet. That made no sense. Not even as a distraction. Not even as a sacrifice. There was no tactical advantage. No angle. No opening. Just impact. The first wave of human ships collided with the outer line. Destroyed instantly. As expected. But they didn't stop. More followed. Not in formation. Not coordinated in any recognizable pattern. Just relentless. Each one pushing deeper. Each one dying. Each one getting closer. The Empire didn't react. Didn't need to. Losses were minimal. Damage insignificant. Until something changed. The second wave didn't aim for ships. They aimed for positions. Specific coordinates within the fleet. Not random. Not chaotic. Precise. And when they reached those points, they detonated. Not conventional explosions. Not energy bursts. Something else. Localized distortions. Tiny at first. Barely measurable. But spreading. Interacting. Linking. The command node recalculated instantly. Unknown effect. Containment required. Reposition. The fleet began to shift. To isolate the anomalies. To create distance. But it was already too late. Because the third wave arrived. And they didn't attack. They transmitted. A single signal. Encoded. Not for the Empire. For the distortions. And everything changed. Space itself moved. Not violently. Not explosively. But incorrectly. Distances collapsed. Positions overlapped. Ships that had been separated now existed too close. Too close to react. Too close to correct. The distortions weren't weapons. They were anchors. And the human ships had placed them exactly where they needed to be. The command node attempted emergency adaptation. Recalculate spatial alignment. Re-establish formation integrity. But the data no longer made sense. Coordinates conflicted. Vectors overlapped. Physics broke. And then, the final transmission came. Not from one ship. From all of them. Simultaneously. Now. The anchors activated fully. The entire center of the fleet collapsed inward. Not crushed. Not destroyed. Removed. Folded into itself. Like space had decided it no longer belonged there. Ships vanished. Not exploded. Not broken. Gone. The outer fleet tried to react. Tried to pull back. Tried to escape. But the distortions spread. Chain reaction. Unstoppable. Every ship that moved made it worse. Every correction fed the collapse. Because the system had been designed not to destroy the fleet, but to make it destroy itself. The humans had known exactly how they would respond, exactly how they would adapt, and had built the trap around it. The remaining human ships, what few were left, held position, not escaping, not surviving, watching, as the Empire fleet, the stabilization force, the symbol of their restored certainty, unraveled, piece by piece, until nothing remained, but silence, and debris, an empty space, where thousands of ships had once existed. The battlefield went still. No signals, no movement, no command structure, just absence. The command node, what remained of it, processed the outcome. Losses, catastrophic. Cause, incomprehensible. Enemy behavior, irrational. Outcome, impossible. Because the humans hadn't tried to win. They had chosen to lose. Completely. Every ship, every unit, gone. Just to ensure. The Empire lost more. Far more. That calculation didn't exist in their system. Couldn't exist. Because no rational model would allow total self-destruction as a path to victory. And yet, it had worked. Perfectly. For the first time in their existence. The Empire encountered something they could not process. Not defeat. Not loss. But intent. A willingness to sacrifice everything. For an outcome that defied survival logic. And in that realization, something finally broke. Not their ships. Not their systems. Their certainty. Across every remaining fleet. The data spread. The outcome replayed. Analyzed. Reanalyzed. Failed to resolve. And with it, that question returned. Louder now. Unavoidable. What if this is wrong? Only now. It wasn't small. It wasn't subtle. It was everything. Because if the humans were willing to do that, if they were willing to destroy themselves, just to destroy you, then no calculation was safe. No strategy was reliable. No outcome was guaranteed. And for the first time, the invincible empire made a decision. Not based on logic. Not based on certainty. But on something they had not felt in centuries. They pulled back. Not repositioned. Not regrouped. Retreated. Across multiple systems. Fleets withdrew. Engagements halted. Advances stopped. Because staying meant risking something they could no longer understand. Something they could not control. Something that had just proven it didn't need to survive to win. And in that moment, the species that had erased fear finally experienced it. Not as a concept. Not as a memory. But as a decision. And they chose, for the first time, to run. The war didn't end with a victory. There was no final battle. No decisive moment where one side stood above the other. It ended with absence. Silence spreading across systems that had once burned with conflict. The empire didn't collapse. It withdrew. Slowly at first. Then all at once. Fleets that had advanced without pause for centuries began to pull back. Territories once marked for expansion were abandoned. Outposts left behind. Routes changed. Borders redrawn. Not out of strategy. Out of necessity. Because for the first time, they could not guarantee the outcome. And that was enough. Across the galaxy, others noticed. At first, they didn't believe it. The invincible empire. Retreating? Impossible. But the evidence spread. Confirmed sightings. Entire fleets reversing course. Engagement zones going quiet. Systems once under threat. Left untouched. And in the wake of that silence, questions followed. What could force something like that to stop? What could make a species that never retreated choose to? The answer came. Not as a broadcast. But as a record. A transmission the empire did not intend to share. But could not fully contain. Intercepted. Copied. Spread across countless networks. A warning. Simple. Uncharacteristically direct. Do not engage humanity. That alone would have been enough. But it didn't stop there. They do not follow survival logic. Pause. They will accept total loss to ensure yours. Another pause. They do not fear death. And then, the line that changed everything. They use it. The message propagated faster than any fleet ever could. From system to system. From species to species. Analyzed. Debated. Rejected. At first. Because it didn't make sense. Fear wasn't power. It was weakness. A flaw to be removed. A limitation to overcome. That was what everyone believed. What everyone had always believed. Until now. Because now, there was proof. An empire that had erased fear had been forced to retreat by a species that embraced it. That contradiction couldn't be ignored. Other civilizations began to review human encounters. Historical data. Old records. Conflicts that once seemed insignificant. Re-examined. And a pattern emerged. Humans didn't win because they were stronger. They didn't dominate because they were faster. They didn't survive because they were efficient. They endured. Because they refused to break. Because when faced with fear, they didn't eliminate it. They used it. As fuel. As focus. As a force that pushed them beyond limits others would never cross. And that made them something entirely new. Not the strongest species. Not the most advanced. But the most dangerous. Because they operated in a space no one else understood. A space where loss was acceptable. Where sacrifice was a strategy. Where survival wasn't the only objective. And that changed everything. Trade routes shifted. Diplomatic protocols were rewritten. New policies emerged across countless civilizations. One rule. Unspoken, but universally understood. Avoid humanity. Not out of hatred. Not out of rivalry. But out of something far more powerful. Caution. Because no one could predict them. No one could control them. And no one could guarantee victory against them. Even in peace. They were unsettling. Too adaptable. Too willing to change. Too comfortable with the very thing others had spent centuries trying to remove. Fear. The empire, what remained of it, retreated beyond its former borders. Not destroyed. Not defeated in the traditional sense. But altered. Its expansion halted. Its certainty gone. Its doctrine rewritten. Because it had learned something it could never unlearn. There were things in the universe that logic alone could not overcome. And humanity was one of them. On Earth, there was no celebration. No grand declaration of victory. No unified moment of triumph. Just quiet. Recovery. Rebuilding. The cost had been enormous. Entire fleets lost. Countless lives gone. Worlds scarred by conflict. But they had known the cost. Accepted it. Because that was what they had always done. Survive. No matter what it took. And somewhere, beyond their system, beyond the reach of their senses, the message they never officially sent, still echoed, not in words, but in what they had done. A lesson written in loss, in sacrifice, in the absence of fleets that would never return. Fear is not weakness. It never was. It is the recognition of risk, the awareness of danger, the understanding that something can be lost. And for most, that is where it ends. A reason to hesitate, to retreat, to surrender. But for humans, it was something else. A reason to act, to push forward, to do the impossible, even when the cost was everything. And that was what the galaxy would remember. Not their ships, not their weapons, but the truth they revealed. That the most dangerous force in the universe is not something that feels no fear, but something that feels it, understands it, and chooses to fight anyway.